Something scary is happening in Kashmir, or so I would like to put that way. India lost to Pakistan in their opening encounter in the World T20 match. Firecrackers went off in the Srinagar Medical College, both girls and boys separately, cheering on the victory of Pakistan. In separate areas, flags of Pakistan were waved around. Firecrackers were also seen in the other parts of India. But in Kashmir, this problem comes across as a bit more aggravated. Before the game, we had this spree of very unfortunate, gruesome killings of civilians. A pharmacist was killed, teachers was killed, a school principal was killed, a street vendor selling golgappa and chaat who hailed from Bihar, who wasn't even a local, was killed. And thus, everyone is asking this one important question now, that we've seen the extremist side of things in the past few weeks. We've seen the civilian side of things very recently because no one really likes the image of people in Kashmir cheering on Pakistan after such a disappointing loss. Yes, win and loss are part of the game, but in Kashmir, the way politics is, the way the history has been, people look at it from a different lens. So people are now asking, what are the realistic long term solutions for Kashmir? And I emphasize on the word realistic here for a specific reason. A lot of people, a lot of well meaning nationalist people have this idea that the only solution to Kashmir is for it to be turned into a perpetual war zone where the military is in a state of confrontation with the civilian always. That's not the solution. And I'll dig more upon this, I'll dig more into this as we go on into this video. For those who want to understand better what we're talking about in this video, because we're talking about the long-term solutions to Kashmir, do check out my previous video where I talk about the Kashmiriyat, where I talk about the new definitions of Kashmiriyat, what it means to different people. I'll put some links in the description, so I recommend you go through them. They're both videos and articles. Now, the first aspect is that firecrackers in the valley, terrorism in the valley, is the government not doing enough? So first I'll address the military side of it. Firstly, it's incorrect to assume that military operations, intelligence agencies, the JK police force, or the administration over there under Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha is only active when there is a need for responding to a terrorist attack. That is the first misconception that needs to be addressed. I was in Kashmir recently and I engaged with a lot of top officials. I had the chance to interview the Lieutenant Governor. The interview is out on Swarajya. It's a very exhaustive interview, so I recommend you read that as well. So I learned that there have been a lot of operations that have been underway in the past 2 years, especially after the revocation of Article 370, where the military agencies, where the armed forces, where the police has been very, very successful in neutralizing a lot of terrorists, a lot of terrorist groups, and a lot of political groups that have been essential in the operations of these terrorist groups. So it's not like because there was a killing spree where 7 to 10 civilians were killed, there is absolutely nothing being done from a military point of view. That is an incorrect assumption. But as I say, with Kashmir, there is always this, perhaps for right reasons or wrong, there's always this case where we'll always hear about the failures of the armed forces of the administration. We'll never learn about their successes. So the 99% of the times, they're actually successful in preventing an attack. The NIA conducting various raids and the outcomes of it, the military forces neutralizing terrorists, or the OGWs around the LOC, we'll never hear about it. That's always inconsequential to the general narrative. But what we'll always hear about is, oh, there was a civilian killed over there, so perhaps the military forces are not doing the job. Or there was a school teacher killed over there, so perhaps the administration is not doing enough. At this point, I also want to raise this one point of the Army Goodwill schools that I had the opportunity to visit in my visit to Kashmir. And these are schools that are being run by the Army. They're not being run, administered by the Army as such, but they are run with the help of the Army, say the monetary support and the kind of resources the military forces are putting in, apart from the administration. It's really remarkable. So there cannot be also question raised that, oh, maybe the government or the military is not doing enough. If I talk about the civilian side, is the administration not doing enough? Is the center not doing enough? Absolutely not. The students who were cheering on Pakistan in Srinagar's medical college were actually studying on scholarships, and these scholarships are funded by the Indian taxpayer. Now, a lot of you would say that what's the need of funding such people? But the government has to make the first effort. The government cannot say, oh, we view you in a certain perception, so we won't give you those scholarships. That's not how it works. So the government has been doing enough in terms of infrastructure. There are highways being inaugurated every second day. Power and transmission is being improved so that Kashmir can get electricity for complete winters for the first time in 70 years, something the Abdullahs and Muftis could not guarantee. They're getting connectivity through railways. They're getting connectivity through the airport in terms of the dry port. They're getting uh, facilities for logistics and whatnot. So the government is doing enough when it comes to outreach. But perhaps the people who are still cheering on Pakistan, a frank conversation needs to be held with them. I don't know who will hold it with them. Will it be the administration or representatives of it? Will it be the police force? Will it be the armed forces? Who? But they need to be asked that if they are so fond of Pakistan, why? How does their conscience allow them to study on scholarships that funded by the Indian taxpayer? So at this point, there's the news coming in through certain sources that the government is now thinking of confiscating all the degrees, they're confiscating all the scholarships, and the general sentiment also favors that. That if they are very hell bent towards supporting Pakistan, might as well confiscate from the scholarships. But the bigger question is the government doing enough? Yes, it is. And the majority Kashmiri Muslims are in tandem with the government. They are pro-government, pro-India. If you look at one of the civilians who was killed in the recent terrorist attacks, he was killed not because he was a Hindu. He wasn't a Hindu at all. He wasn't a Sikh. He was one of the heads of a local trader association engaged in taxis and all those things. And he was killed because he was supposedly seen as a pro-India voice. So this is the new narrative that's developing in Kashmir, that if you're a pro-Indian voice, we'll come for you. So yes, that addresses the part of the government doing it. Now coming to the second aspect, what are the long-term solutions apart from the government outreach programs? I boil this down to three aspects. Three very, very simple aspects. The first thing is you have to continue the path, the pursuit of economic integration of Kashmir with the rest of India. There is no two ways about it. There's no doubt about it. Yes, there would be disruptions. I said in my last video also that what Kashmir is going through is a transformation from religious fanaticism to economic nationalism. So you have to continue this pursuit of economic integration of Kashmir with the rest of India through infrastructure, through investments, through innovation, whatnot. That has to continue. But more importantly, India has to continue its pursuit of being a $5 trillion economy so that it can assert itself in Kashmir in the right way. It's very important. Look at what China did when it came to Tibet, when it came to Xinjiang. Of course, questions can be raised about the occupation, questions can be raised about was it a legal occupation or not. We still have a Tibetan government in exile to this day. But at the end of the day, what China did in Xinjiang and Tibet was economic integration through infrastructure. You have high-speed rail network until Tibet, until Xinjiang. So India needs to think on the same lines. It is very, very important that you become a $4-5 trillion economy by the end of this decade and assert your position in Kashmir. Realistically, and I emphasize on the word realistically here, that's how diplomacy works in the greater scheme of things. Today, if India is a $5 trillion economy, a market of 1 billion people, no one would even dare to question what's India's position on Kashmir. Pakistan, an economic stooge of China, would not be in a position to question India at the United Nations. And with Kashmir economically integrated with the rest of India, even Kashmiri Muslims, even Kashmiri Hindus, every single Kashmiri would also question that narrative that Kashmir is a part of India. So that's the first step. The second step is, and I propose this as an idea, as a theory. Jammu should be made a different state. Now, the first question that arises is, what about the military operations then? I asked this question to three different people. I asked this question to someone in the JK police force. I asked this question to someone in the army, a very top official. I asked this question to the Lieutenant Governor also. And while the military aspect of it says that it doesn't matter, if you make Jammu a different state, it doesn't matter to us, the Lieutenant Governor said that they were not thinking on any of these lines. Though there has been a demand from the residents of Jammu, from the political stakeholders of Jammu, that let's make Jammu a different state. And I'll tell you why. For long, again, realistically, Jammu has been given that stepchild treatment by all the governments. Because every resource that comes down in Jammu and Kashmir is first allocated to Srinagar. Or there is a hospital, it goes to Srinagar first and then to Jammu. Not that Jammu has not got nothing. But because of the problems in Kashmir, because of the problem that is concentrated in 4-5 districts of Kashmir, the development of Jammu has been handicapped. It has been sort of subdued, and it's time to correct that historical wrong. So, what the government can do right now is declare Jammu as a separate state, perhaps in the run up to the 2024 elections, and look at making Jammu a state, not Kashmir, just Jammu, by 2025, 2026. And look at it as a separate development experiment. Jammu has different needs, it has a different geography compared to Kashmir. The infrastructure needs are different, the investment needs would be different, the kind of political setup there is going to be very, very different, the kind of military presence that needs to be there is going to be very, very different. So it's time Jammu is made a separate state, so that whatever problem there is in the in the UT of Jammu and Kashmir and in the state of Jammu and Kashmir historically is no longer a reason for Jammu's development to stay subdued. And the third is Kashmir needs to be pumped in with a lot of money for the next 5 years. Given the emerging threat of Taliban, given the lone wolf terror attacks. Now, if you look at the terror attacks in the recent weeks, they resemble the lone wolf terror attacks that were very routine in Europe in between 2016 and 2018 when ISIS was at its peak. If you remember, there were lorries ramming into people, knife attacks at Westminster Bridge, and things like that. So these attacks will become common. So it's very, very important that one, there's intelligence that is keeping track of such attacks, keeping track of the radicalization that may happen through internet with the emerging threat of Taliban. But at the same time, the third realistic solution, and some may disagree to it, but again, this brings me back to my first solution, economic integration. You have to keep pumping in money and investments and resources into the state of Kashmir, because right now the people of Kashmir are economically desperate. After 370, 1 year was taken away. Then pandemic came, another year was taken away. So if you look at the three long-term solutions to conclude for Kashmir, a separate statehood for Jammu, Kashmir remains a UT. While Kashmir remains a UT, pump in as much money and investments as you can over the course of next 5 years, while evaluating the threat from Taliban and across the LOC, of course. And lastly, continue the pursuit of India as a $4 to $5 trillion economy, so that in the global stage, when the time comes, India can assert its position on Kashmir, and Narendra Modi can claim the peace process, the ushering of peace in Kashmir as his greatest political legacy. Thank you.